Welcome back to Dinar Shift, your primary source for tracking the complex yet pivotal economic transition unfolding within Iraq's financial structure. For years, the Iraqi Dinar, or IQD, has stood at the center of a global conversation regarding currency reform, often acting as a gauge for the broader reconstruction and stabilization of the Iraqi economy. Today marks what many seasoned analysts consider to be one of the most substantial and formalized steps in this multi-year process, moving beyond speculation and into the realm of actionable legal commitment. The government's official record, the Iraqi Gazette, has confirmed and published the intricate details of a critical piece of legislation, which observers have dubbed the new four-step exchange law. This legal blueprint is the culmination of years of global anticipation, offering the first formal, structured language regarding the potential evolution of the IQD's framework. For a long time, the discourse surrounding the dinar has been a mix of broad macroeconomic theories, minute analysis of geopolitical events, and unverified information, often leading to a landscape dominated by rumors. The publication of this legal mechanism introduces a necessary dose of clarity, placing any potential future changes onto a written, reviewable, and institutional foundation. The ongoing narrative around the IQD has always been unusually complex, weaving together high-level central bank declarations, draft legislative language, and reports from secondary sources in an attempt to project a likely course of action. This synthesis of information, which ranges from highly credible institutional statements to less substantiated reports, has naturally created both deeply insightful commentary and substantial noise. It is against this backdrop of persistent, high-volume speculation that the emergence of a formal legal text is genuinely significant. This text clearly articulates the procedural principles, institutional obligations, and technical responsibilities that will govern the currency's future. The sheer importance of established legal language cannot be overstated in financial matters. Legislation of this nature fundamentally changes the environment by setting enforceable procedures, clearly assigning institutional responsibilities, and sending an unmistakable signal of governmental intent that fleeting rumors simply cannot replicate. If this newly published law clearly defines how different classifications of currency will be handled, outlines the specific steps for future exchange procedures, and establishes a clear framework for financial oversight, it provides stakeholders with a vital tool. This is a formal structure they can use to prepare for compliance, assess various market options, and consider the real-world implications of any potential future monetary decisions. However, it is crucial that any sense of optimism sparked by this development is carefully tempered by prudence and detailed analysis. Reading any law, especially one of this magnitude, requires a careful distinction between language that enables future action and language that mandates immediate action. Legal reform is rarely a sudden event. It is almost always an incremental process that necessitates subsequent, detailed rulemaking, coordination with international partners, and significant operational upgrades within the domestic banking infrastructure before any tangible market shift can possibly manifest. In essence, the mere existence of this formal legal language is a substantive indicator of institutional commitment. It undeniably reduces a degree of uncertainty that has plagued the dinar community for years. Yet this legal step must not be mistaken for an immediate or guaranteed market outcome. Stakeholders around the world are encouraged to treat this blueprint as a powerful and meaningful signal that warrants careful, evidence-based planning rather than as a definitive confirmation of any specific timeline or valuation change. For American and other international audiences who have closely monitored the potential for a currency revaluation RV, this legal action may be the clearest indication yet that forward movement is not a question of if, but rather of when, and through what precise legal mechanism. For the multitude of US-based observers who have tracked IQD developments over the past decade, a published legal text provides a completely new and rigorous axis of analysis. Where online rumors and speculative forum posts offer anecdotal information, legal language provides concrete obligations, clearly delegated authorities, and specific procedural steps that can be meticulously evaluated from a legal and compliance standpoint. U.S. stakeholders, in particular, must also navigate the intersection of any Iraqi legal changes with their own American tax, law, banking regulations, and mandatory reporting requirements. This demands that the law be interpreted through a multifaceted lens of analysis. This required analysis involves scrutinizing the macroeconomic and monetary intentions embedded within the published text, assessing the operational capacity of Iraqi institutions to genuinely implement the new framework, anticipating the likely reaction of global financial partners and markets, and finally, calculating the subsequent ripple effects for both physical and digital dinar holders outside of Iraq. it is also fundamentally important to parse the language meticulously. A central question is whether the text establishes a binding, immediate schedule for currency conversion, or if it merely grants the central bank the authority to adopt future rules when the economic conditions are deemed appropriate. Furthermore, analysts must determine if the law's enabling power is contingent upon certain external conditions, such as the achievement of specific fiscal policy milestones or compliance with existing International Monetary Fund (IMF) programs. These distinctions hold enormous practical consequence as they determine whether the law is an enabling statute, a permission slip for future, detailed rulemaking, or a fully concrete roadmap that instantly triggers specific administrative actions and irreversible steps. American stakeholders should therefore utilize this legal publication as a key data point, meaningful and potentially consequential, but recognize it remains one piece within a broader, more complex mosaic of necessary political will, operational capacity, and international coordination. Above all, the natural excitement generated by such a formal development must be governed by rigorous analysis and, where appropriate, professional counsel. This ensures that individuals make any choices consistent with established legal realities and sound financial planning practices. The purpose of methodically dissecting the law, clause by clause, is not to diminish hope, but to effectively replace conjecture with verifiable comprehension. When studying complex statutes, observers typically encounter three different categories of provisions, each with distinct practical implications for market participants and regulators alike. These three provision types are broad policy statements, which primarily signal general political intent, enabling clauses, which delegate the authority to create detailed rules and regulations to a relevant agency or ministry, and procedural mandates, which establish specific, often time-bound steps and corresponding responsibilities. Each category carries a different weight regarding implementation. A high-level policy statement is important for signaling political alignment, but does not, by itself, alter daily market operations. An enabling clause is a necessary prerequisite for operational change, but invariably requires substantial, subsequent regulatory action, such as drafting implementation rules and issuing internal procedures, before end users observe any change. Procedural mandates, in contrast, can often be acted upon more quickly because they establish clear, concrete steps and assign specific administrative duties. The critical exercise for all stakeholders is to accurately identify which parts of the law fall into which category, which provisions are merely declarative, which require extensive administrative follow-through, and which create immediate binding obligations. Additionally, looking beyond the text to how the law seamlessly interacts with established institutions, such as the Central Bank of Iraq (CBI), the Ministry of Finance, and relevant auditing bodies, provides crucial further clarity regarding both feasibility and likely timelines. Finally, for anyone considering a future course of action, it is absolutely essential to distinguish legally authorized pathways from informal or rumor-driven channels. The systematic, step-by-step analysis that follows is designed to illuminate these distinctions, to show where the new law creates actual operational mechanisms versus where it simply signals a future intent, what each specific provision would realistically require to implement, and how each element might affect the holdings of dinar, both inside Iraq and for those holding notes abroad. By evaluating these points systematically, observers can effectively filter out the noise and develop a reasoned perspective firmly rooted in documented official legal change. Step 1. Redefining what constitutes exchangeable currency. The initial step defined within the law is foundational and holds substantial importance. It involves recasting the legal definition of what will be recognized as an exchangeable currency. By doing so, the law fundamentally reshapes the baseline rules that determine the legitimacy of the IQD in both domestic and international markets. This redefinition can cover multiple dimensions, including clearly specifying the issuance authority which notes or coins constitute legal tender, clarifying the status of obsolete or commemorative denominations, establishing technical procedures for authentication and serial number verification, and enumerating the required certifications for bank-grade acceptance globally. These elements are critically important because they determine what financial institutions, both within Iraq and internationally, will formally treat as acceptable for exchange. If the law were to narrow the acceptable forms of tender to only specific, newer series of banknotes, or if it were to introduce technical standards for condition and verified provenance, holders of older or unofficially issued notes might find their assets legally excluded from formal exchange windows. Conversely, a law that broadens acceptable criteria or explicitly authorizes the conversion of previously non-exchangeable instruments under secure, controlled procedures could open new pathways for wider inclusion. The new legal language may also contain mandates requiring the CBI or a designated authority to publish official lists, issue detailed identification guides, and implement public awareness campaigns to prevent widespread confusion. Operationalizing such a massive redefinition requires significant logistical capacity, including the training of bank staff, the comprehensive updating of identification scanners, the construction of secure verification databases, and the design of secure transit and storage protocols. All of these required infrastructure developments directly affect the practical timelines for implementation. Ultimately, redefining exchangeable currency is far from merely a symbolic gesture. It actively reorders market reality. However, the smooth transition between the statutory definition and actual market practice is entirely dependent on the clarity of the law's technical standards and the institutional capacity to execute them without creating widespread ambiguity or logistical bottlenecks. By formally codifying these new classification requirements, Iraq is taking a definitive step toward modernizing its monetary laws to align with internationally accepted banking and financial practices. The legislation meticulously spells out the required characteristics of currency, and specifically the dinar, must possess to be recognized for formal institutional exchange. These characteristics include detailed issuance standards, verifiable backing requirements, comprehensive transparency measures, and explicit oversight by the Central Bank of Iraq (CBI). Each one of these components possesses both technical and legal implications that demand careful scrutiny. For instance, issuance standards determine which printing series or authorized signatures confer legal status, while backing requirements outline what assets, if any, will be held in reserve to support the currency's value claims. Transparency measures could mandate public reporting, detailed audit trails, or internationally accessible registries, and explicit oversight by the CBI establishes a clear single point of regulatory and operational responsibility. Bringing these essential components into statutory form signals a strong intention to harmonize domestic monetary governance with the expectations of global investors, international correspondent banks, and major financial institutions. This harmonization is critical because it directly reduces friction in cross-border transactions by providing counterparties with clearer assurances regarding the currency's authenticity, its regulatory backing, and the available channels for dispute resolution. Yet merely declaring these high standards in law is only the foundational beginning. True implementation requires clear, technical specifications, a robust build-out of institutional capacity, and continuous, rigorous compliance monitoring. For example, if the backing requirements reference foreign reserve holdings or commodity-linked instruments, the auditability and transparency of those holdings becomes central to maintaining international credibility. If transparency mandates public reports, then the timing, content, and accessibility of those reports are key. If oversight duties are assigned to the CBI, the bank must be provided with both the legal mandate and the necessary operational budget to conduct verifications, maintain detailed registries, and effectively coordinate with global partners. In summary, this modernization through legal codification is vital because it establishes the preconditions for international acceptance. However, those preconditions will only impact the market positively if they are implemented with technical rigor and supported by sufficient, sustained institutional backing. The law also wisely references established international guidelines from bodies such as the IMF and the Bank for International Settlements (BIS), a notable signal of Iraq's intention to fully integrate with recognized global financial norms. Referencing these external frameworks creates an expectation of compatibility, which can significantly ease interactions with correspondent banking systems and multilateral lenders. The IMF, BIS, and other global standard-setting bodies provide a comprehensive set of best practices concerning reserve reporting, monetary policy transparency, anti-money laundering protocols, and bank supervision. When a nation's law explicitly cites these norms, it indicates a formal commitment to transparency, reliable reporting, and external validation. For international actors, such references can reduce the perceived policy risk by indicating that reforms will adhere to tested methodological approaches rather than ad hoc or idiosyncratic practices. Practically, the citation of international guidelines is not equivalent to instant compliance. True integration demands comprehensive audits, significant capacity building, necessary statutory alignments, and ongoing cooperation, processes that can realistically span many months or even years. Partner institutions may require verifiable proof of implementation, such as published audit reports, demonstrable reserve holdings, or documented upgrades to central bank governance, before they are willing to provide technical assistance or alter their operational terms. Nevertheless, The inclusion of IMF and BIS language provides an important framing device. It communicates to international markets that Iraq intends to adhere to widely understood and globally accepted rules of finance. For stakeholders, this adherence is crucial because it raises the probability that any future actions, whether a revaluation, redenomination, or operational reform, will be scrutinized and validated through standard global channels. This makes it more likely that the consequences of change will be navigated in cooperation with external authorities rather than in isolation. For U.S.-based dinar holders, this strongly suggests that Iraq is laying the structural groundwork for greater global visibility, which is a necessary foundation for any future valuation shift to be embraced internationally. The distinction between domestic legal reform and international acceptance remains critically important. Domestic statutes have the power to authorize and organize local activities, but genuine international acceptance relies entirely on correspondent banks, foreign regulators, custodial institutions, and multilateral lenders being willing to engage under the new rules. U.S.-based holders should therefore view this law as an essential preliminary step. It successfully creates the legislative scaffolding that could enable future operational changes, but it does not by itself guarantee that foreign governments or global markets will immediately accept a new valuation or redenomination without their own due diligence processes. Practical barriers such as compliance checks, sanctions screening, provenance verification, and mandatory tax reporting will continue to shape how U.S. institutions handle dinar-related flows. Additionally, U.S. holders must consider all domestic legal implications, including capital gains treatment, reporting obligations, and potential AML-CFT scrutiny if substantial volumes of currency move across borders. Preparation should therefore involve seeking legal consultations, meticulously documenting the provenance of notes, ensuring appropriate custody arrangements, and fully understanding all relevant reporting thresholds. The law's structural groundwork is immensely valuable because it clearly signals intent and establishes a basis for standardized, accountable procedures. However, converting that groundwork into internationally actionable movement requires sustained institutional coordination, demonstrable transparency, and credible operational readiness that successfully satisfies the rigorous risk management frameworks of global financial counterparties. Step 2. Establishing an official framework for exchange rate adjustments. The second step is arguably the most closely watched by currency speculators and international investors. Here, the law formally defines a specific, structured system for how the CBI is authorized to publish, update, or alter the dinar's official exchange rate. The legal codification of an exchange rate framework is deeply significant because currency valuation is always a function of both market dynamics and institutional policy. When a central bank is granted explicit statutory authority to manage rates under prescribed protocols, it significantly reduces ambiguity around who can act, how they must act, and the checks and balances that accompany that authority. The law may stipulate the promulgation of detailed rules concerning the timing of announcements, the specific verified channels used to communicate rate changes, the necessary coordination with national fiscal policy, and the documentation required to legally justify any adjustment. By creating these formal procedural guardrails, legislators aim to prevent abrupt, poorly documented shifts that could cause widespread market disruption or invite accusations of manipulation. For market participants, a statutory framework is designed to create predictability by clarifying the circumstances under which rate changes may occur, for example, in response to inflationary pressures, changes in foreign reserves, or international agreements, and the procedural steps that must be strictly followed. Nevertheless, the practical implications will ultimately depend on the level of discretion granted to the CBI, the specific measurable criteria outlined for action, and the CBI's actual capacity to coordinate effectively with other government agencies and with international partners. If the law links rate authority to robust transparency obligations, such as requiring the publication of supporting economic data, consulting with external experts, or coordinating with the IMF, it can dramatically build credibility. Conversely, if the law grants very wide discretion without clear accountability mechanisms, stakeholders will remain highly uncertain about how and when changes might be enacted. Thus, while codifying the exchange rate mechanism addresses a critical regulatory gap, its actual impact will be determined by the precise balance between authority and accountability embedded in the text and by how successfully that balance is operationalized in practice. This framework is not merely procedural, it is about establishing authority, transparency, and trustworthiness. The CBI must now adhere to standardized protocols before announcing any rate changes, including advance notification, detailed documentation procedures, and coordination with international bodies like the IMF. Crucially, any future exchange rate modification must be widely and reliably published through verified official channels, including the Iraqi Gazette official digital portals and established international news systems. While the law deliberately avoids setting a specific date for changes, it clearly and formally outlines the governing mechanism. Iraq is effectively declaring that any future shifts in the dinar's value will be lawful, transparent, and internationally coordinated, not sudden or secretive actions. This set of commitments is genuinely meaningful because it reframes potential action from being driven by rumor-fueled speculation to being managed through institutionally governed, accountable processes. The requirements for advance notification and documentation significantly reduce the possibility of surprise announcements that could destabilize both domestic and external markets, while coordination with international bodies helps ensure technical rigor and lends crucial external credibility to the decisions. Requiring publication on official, verifiable channels makes it harder for misinformation to spread and easier for global counterparties to confirm the legitimacy of any announced changes. Importantly, however, the absence of a specific date signals an intentional separation between the act of authorization and the act of execution. Lawmakers are providing the CBI with the necessary legal tools to act while purposefully avoiding preset, rigid timelines in order to retain essential flexibility for responding to dynamic economic conditions. For all holders and observers, the takeaway is dual. The law builds procedures intended to foster trust and diminish chaotic market reactions, but it also unequivocally underscores that timing will be driven by technical, fiscal, and political considerations, not by calendar promises. That combination of institutionalization and indeterminate timing successfully reduces certain risks while wisely preserving the central bank's ability to respond to evolving economic realities. Step 3. Creating legal channels for international interaction with the dinar. The third major step is focused squarely on external engagement. This portion of the law explicitly defines how foreign banks, global currency exchanges, and secure digital platforms can legally and formally interact with the Iraqi dinar. This is an absolutely critical element for successfully linking Iraq's domestic currency to the wider global market infrastructure. The law is designed to clarify which entities are authorized to conduct dinar-related transactions and establishes clear reporting requirements, verification procedures, and essential digital safeguards. Notably, this section is reported to include forward-looking language that allows for the future integration of technologies like blockchain and secure digital ledger systems. This strategic inclusion could eventually pave the way for U.S. institutions and online trading platforms to offer legal dinar transactions within a fully regulated and transparent environment. For those who hold dinar outside of Iraq, this step is potentially pivotal. It signals Iraq's institutional readiness to make the dinar more accessible and more compatible with global finance, contingent on the continued successful progression of the reforms. Step 4. Anti-fraud measures and compliance, enforcement. The final fourth step directly confronts the long-standing issues of financial fraud, market manipulation, and the persistent problem of black market trading. It introduces strict new compliance rules specifically designed to restore integrity and trust within Iraq's monetary ecosystem. The requirements include mandatory audit trails for large-scale exchanges, compulsory reporting for all institutions handling the dinar, and the creation of a new oversight authority with comprehensive investigative powers. Penalties for violations are severe, ranging from heavy financial fines to the revocation of banking licenses and even criminal prosecution. By significantly strengthening enforcement capabilities, Iraq aims to demonstrate its utmost seriousness to international observers. This step is about more than just preventing misconduct. It is fundamentally about building international credibility. Strong compliance infrastructure is essential if Iraq is to successfully attract foreign direct investment and participate in the global financial system on stable and enduring terms. Understanding redenomination versus devaluation, a recurring source of widespread confusion within the dinar community, is the precise distinction between redenomination and devaluation. They are not interchangeable. Redenomination is essentially a recalibration of currency denominations. For example, retiring the 25,000 Iraqi dinars note and introducing a new 25 Iraqi dinars note, without altering the currency's real purchasing power. The underlying value remains exactly the same, only the numbers change. This move is common in countries recovering from periods of inflation and is intended to streamline commerce, enhance financial literacy, and improve anti-counterfeit protections. For dinar holders, particularly those abroad, This action does not reduce the underlying value of their holdings. Instead, it reflects Iraq's institutional effort to modernize and simplify its currency landscape. Nationwide education and public awareness campaign. Recognizing that comprehensive reforms can only be successful if the citizens fully understand them, Iraq has reportedly launched a countrywide public education campaign. This effort utilizes various channels, including television, radio, newspapers, and local community meetings. Information is being shared in multiple languages and dialects, ensuring the widest possible accessibility. Government officials, economists, and respected community figures are actively explaining the new law, addressing common misconceptions, and providing practical guidance. The core goal is to cultivate an informed public that can confidently navigate the financial transition and effectively avoid scams or misinformation. For global observers, this campaign underscores Iraq's profound commitment to both transparency and public participation, growing international attention and financial interest. As news of the new exchange law and Iraq's structural reforms spreads, global markets are beginning to take tangible notice. Banks in the Gulf region, major financial firms in Asia, and prominent international financial institutions are actively reassessing Iraq's economic trajectory. A major contributing factor behind this renewed interest is Iraq's robust foreign currency reserves, which are currently the strongest they have been in more than 20 years. These substantial reserves reflect disciplined fiscal management, significantly improved financial controls, and reduced corruption. With a substantial financial buffer, Iraq is able to pursue these complex reforms without relying heavily on external loans or aid. For emerging market investors, this signals a high degree of durability and seriousness. While this development does not indicate dramatic immediate market movement, it unequivocally confirms that Iraq's financial system is maturing and successfully attracting serious global attention.